welcome to our site visit report. I'm Jeanette, and today we talk about the suburb Box Hill. It is about 14 kilometers to the east of Melbourne CBD, and the name Box Hill, which first used on February 1861, was suggested by Silas Padgham, the postmaster, and derived from Box Hill, England, near his birthplace. Box Hill is one of the suburbs in the city of Whitehorse, and it is named after the long road connecting several suburbs. Based on feng shui, dragons symbolize prosperity and success. That it is believed that Box Hill is the body of the dragon, whereas Glen Waverley is the tail and the head of the dragon is Doncaster. This myth was set by a lot of estate agents for marketing and client targeting. The Australian Bureau of Statistics was taken to show the community profile of Box Hill in 2021. First, we're looking at the statistic of birthplace, and this is calculated approximately 61.1% of the population was born overseas. More than a third of the residents were born in Australia. Coming right behind is China with 32.9%. There are also Malaysia, India, Hong Kong, Vietnam, and South Korea. 8% of them are not stated or represent a small proportion. When it comes to ancestry, the number of Australia is only 10.1% compared to 41% of the Chinese, and English ancestry only fills in 14%. To see how Chinese become the tenant of Box Hill, we will look at the street map on Whitehorse Road. There are Vietnamese, Korean, Turkic, but still the Chinese culture occupies the majority of the street. We can see the restaurant from the other country, but they still have Chinese kanji on the sign. There's also Korean style Chinese cuisine. It looks like the map is taken from somewhere in China, not in Australia. Moving next to the historical background of Box Hill.
People, Aboriginal Australians that live in Box Hill, which is the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nations, whose tradition had been connected to the land dating back more than 40,000 years ago. And nowadays, this evidence still exists in the land of Box Hill, whether it's from artifacts to some heritage cultural items, and a lot of them are buried underground. After the settlements of the British in the colonialisms, the British people start spreading out through Australia and started doing their businesses and developing new lands, which Box Hill was one of them. And the land was formerly a Van Diemen's land, which after that was settled by the squatter Arundel Wrights. And for the first permanent residential settlers, which were the Thomas Toogood and his wife Edith, who purchased a 5,000 acres land, which is around 20 kilometers square in 1841, and Wright built a house on his property called Marion Vale in 1844. Nowadays, we can find these pioneer settlers, especially at Arundel Wright Memorial in the Pioneer Park, which is made by his chimney stones from his own house back in the day. In 1871, Box Hill population was 154 people, and the economy relied mostly on agricultural field as their financial solution, including orchards, vineyards, and mixed farming. The developments of Box Hill started to come as transportation started to take off in 1882, and the railway lines connecting Camberwell and Lauderdale passed through Box Hill stations, and also connecting Canterbury and Surrey Hills, attracting subdivisions and also developments among these areas, and especially Box Hills. And Box Hill Station back then was described as a single platform which with a small timber shed. Despite the undoubted advantage of transportation, the level crossing of the lines on the Station Street was reported to be a sore problem for motorists, pedestrians, and shopkeepers, and as a result, the line was brought underground in 1983. In, in around 1916 and 1917, the tramline stretched to the western side of Box Hills, which resulted in residential growth of Box Hill 1 year after World War One. In 1911, the Box Hill station opened in the old days of steam trains, but it soon got electrified in 1922, and the station survived until it was lowered and altered to the ground to be a part of the Box Hill Central nowadays. In terms of industry, back in the 19th century, Box Hill was a place for various industrial developments such as agricultural machinery, gas supply, and brickworks, and many more. And Daniel Harvey was one of the largest agricultural machinery and equipment supplier for interstate and also local areas. And the company was located on the west corner of Lindsay and Whitehorse Road, and it was a place for many Box Hill people to work at back in the 1930s and 1940s. And competing with the company was the company called Russell and Company, which was also one of the agricultural equipment suppliers, advertising themselves as the inventor of the U-bar, the spray for orchards and vineyards. One of Box other major industries was the brickworks brought up by the Halton Brick Company in 1884. The business then opened a brickwork under the name the Box Brick Company. And in 1911, after a lot of failing and restarts, the productions, the company started again under the names Standard Brick and Tile Company. The company was the supplier for the construction of the new town hall, and it soon closed in 1942 due to the outbreak of war and opened back in 1946 and continued to dedicate itself to the housing construction of Box Hill for many years. In 1988, it marks the end date of the business, and it was then declared by the state governments as a heritage place. Until these days, the evidence of the company still exists, with the factory and the local tall chimney.
So I'll be covering Dominic's part after Tony. So we'll start off with the symbol of the city, which is the white horse, and the white horse is basically just a representation of strength, courage, and fertility. And Thomas Lindsley, who was the man who came up with the white horse, actually carved it into his dining table, and then two sculptors created it, which was David Clark, who was a cabinet maker, and a French artist who was commissioned by William Graham's wife. And so the first appearance of the White Horse was in 1888 in front of the White Horse Hotel. Moving on, we have the Box Hill Town Hall, which was actually the official site of citizenship ceremonies to people from many countries, in particular Latvia, Poland, Holland, at the time. So the churches, St. Peter's Peace Memorial Church of England and the Uniting Church. So the Uniting Church is also known as the St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church. And St. Peter's Memorial Church was actually built on a site that had a previous building on it, but it was destroyed by a disastrous fire. The church, St. Peter's Peace Church, was actually built in 1953, and the Uniting Church was built in 1935. The Railway Hotel, so it was built in 1882. The Railway Hotel was a successful business at the time that it was built into two-story building in 1914, but then there was like a downfall, and then it later got delicensed following a local option poll during 1920, causing Box Hill to become a dry area. So although it's not running as a hotel like before, the tower still stands, and it's kind of one of Box Hill's landmarks to this day. We have the war memorials. So there's the South African and China War Memorial. The the South African and China War Memorial, which was known as the Boer War Memorial, is just to commemorate many of the men who served in either wars between 1899 and 1902. And we also have the war memorial dedicated to the men of Box Hill District, and all their names are inscribed into the concrete slab, and also it it resides in the Box Hill Gardens. There's also metal plates called Memorial Steel at the War World Memorial that just have the dates of the wars that commenced and when they started, when they ended, just to show respect and pay homage to the people whose life got sacrificed on that during that time. And that concludes Dominique's part. Thank you. Hi everyone. So my name is Janan and I'll be covering migration. So migration was such a big thing back in the 1950s where immigrants from all around the globe actually came to Australia for the gold rush. And in 2016, a census had concluded that 38% of Box Hill's residents were born overseas and one third of them are from non-English speaking background. So Box Hill's top 5 countries of birth are the UK, China, India, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. And the languages commonly used are Mandarin, Cantonese, Greek, Italian, and Vietnamese. So the Dutch, Greek, and Italian migrants and the Chinese migrants came during the gold rush period and stayed, but some of them did leave. Although the ones that did stay actually just started doing other jobs after the gold rush declined, and then they proceeded to build a community over the years. In the 19th century, the convicts from the Netherlands were transported to Australia along with a small group of settlers who migrated along with them, and so that made up the Dutch immigrant portion. Also, many Italians commenced work as laborers and artists, amongst other things, and then proceeded to move on to different parts of Australia to live after the gold rush declined. Moving on, so the Chinese immigrants continue to settle in Box Hill to this day because of how familiar it feels to them, because of all the influence the Chinese community had on shaping Box Hill and its cultural identity. So it's actually really important for them to preserve their culture, so they do that while also respecting the Australian values. 11.5% of the community were actually born in China, and the residents of the Box Hill celebrate every year Chinese New Year by holding a festival in central Box Hill. And so Quan Yan, who's a China-born Box Hill resident, says that Box Hill looks and feels like a residential area in Nanjing or Shanghai. That's why Box Hill these days is known as mini Shanghai, because it's an Asian dominated suburb. Also, like many of the Box Hill's Chinese residents are actually pretty highly educated people. So when they did move to Box Hill, they ended up opening their own businesses. Moving on, we're going to discuss how each of these immigrant groups has contributed to the Box Hill identity. So the Dutch immigrants, they were actually the largest non-British migrant group in both Box Hill and Nunawading in the 1950s. And so they just they established a Lutheran congregation in the area as early as 1948, and then they proceeded to build a church on the corner of Station Street and Elland Road. The Dutch migrants also founded the Reformed Church of Australia in 1951, and as you can see on the side, this is what it looks like in 2022. So because of their prominence in Box Hill, some local businesses such as the ANZ Bank did run a newspaper advertisement that was in Dutch. Then we have the Greek and Italian migrants. So the presence of the Mediterranean migrants was first noted by Gordon Moyes in 1940 when he noted the presence of a Greek cafe. However, it wasn't until the 1960s that the community gained prominence with the profilation of continental delicacies and the opening of Box Hill's first pizza restaurant. We also have a second congregation was established in Vermont South, which was a Greek Orthodox Church of St. Andrews, as you can see in the photo below. And in 1968, a Greek Orthodox parish was established, which was St. Francis Xavier's Church in 1977, which is the photo at the top. We have the Chinese migrants. The As Asian migration increased during the 1970s, so did the study area's physical presence. Box Hill now has a Chinese community social center. It also provides meals from what was then the suburb's only Asian restaurant that was called Yangtze Cafe. I have it bracketed so you guys can see. Many more restaurants, along with grocery stores and other specialty retailers catering to the Asian community. They also have plans to open a Chinatown in Box Hill, so that would definitely allow the economic, entertainment, and cultural aspects of the suburb to thrive while acknowledging the history of the site and its inhabitants. So, to conclude, Box Hill is a suburb that we all actually really liked when we visited. It just has a different atmosphere compared to other suburbs. And yeah, it's very rich with history and culture that it just makes you want to go and visit every time, because every time you go, you learn something new. Thank you. That concludes our presentation.